Hello, welcome to FM Language. This is our second class on genre, and we will talk about genre both from a Bakhtinian and a systemic functional linguistics perspective. In her book, Introduction to Functional Linguistics, Eggins defines genre as a staged, goal-oriented, purposeful social activity. More specifically, in chapter 3 of said book, she states that genre is the way in which context of culture or culture is realized in language. Following Mikhail Bakhtin, Eggins sees that culture or cultures as sets of social spheres that belong to different genres which are routinized, that is, individuals who enter an interaction or who participate or take part in an interaction will exhibit behaviors, verbal and non-verbal, that are culturally conventionalized, that are culturally routinized. That is to say, we're habituated to those kind of interactions. The advantage of routinization is basically its economy. That is, every time we interact in different social contexts, again in different social spheres that make up our culture, we do not need to start from scratch. We know exactly what we need to do when we perform different actions in different contexts. Be it the writing of a letter, be it the filling in of an application form, the participation in a job interview, or simply the telling of an anecdote in everyday life. Then, following this line of thinking, we can confidently claim that there are as many genres as there are spheres of social life, and these spheres of social life are made up of interactions that will regulate our verbal and non-verbal behavior. And again, the reason is that we need to have some kind of guidance regarding what we should do or what we are expected to do in different contexts of interaction, in different cultures and subcultures. Our knowledge of how to behave in different interactions, both verbally and non-verbally, has been defined by Hymes as communicative competence. So communicative competence is our knowledge of what to say and when to say it, in which order. Basically, what we know is the structure of communicational encounters. In her book, Eggins quotes Labov, who has studied the behavior of African Americans when telling stories, more specifically what we can call personal experience narratives. Eggins, following Labov, points out that personal experience narratives have a compositional structure. That is why we talk about stages. That is, they are made up of number 1, abstract, number 2, orientation, number 3, conflict, number 4, evaluation, number 5, resolution, number 6, coding. We will not discuss these categories here. What is interesting to note is that in African American English, according to Labov, people engage in storytelling, in everyday conversation, and they follow a certain pattern. That is the reason why Eggins claims, following Labov again, that narratives can have a specific structure that is made up of different stages. When discussing the nature of genres, Bakhtin talks about their compositional structure. Again, if we think of narratives, we're going to have a conflict, we're going to have a resolution, maybe, we're going to have a setting or orientation, so they have a specific composition. There is a term that Bakhtin uses. Stage is a term that Eggins, Martin and Rose use to make reference to, again, the structure of a specific genre, in this case the narrative, or the narrative of personal experience. In our definition, this is basically what we want to break up and analyze today. Then we have the word stages. We have just talked about the stages. The other key term is activity. So telling a story is a social activity. That is, in social interactions, we're expected to tell stories. And such stories have a specific goal and they have specific purposes. This is what we will analyze next. So let us discuss the term activity in our definition of genre. Notice that the way we put it, we said narratives are made up of different stages. Again, to know abstract, orientation, conflict, evaluation, resolution, coda. That's the structure not only of the texts that we produce, but also of the activities that we perform. So we should see the statement of a conflict as an activity. Why is that an activity? Well, basically, we tell stories in order to share our personal experiences, in the case of PEN, personal experience narratives. But think of stories as spaces where we promote some kind of dilemma, where we posit there is a dilemma here, something that we should do and something that we shouldn't do, because there are things that are good and there are things that are evil, or there are actions that are good and there are actions that are evil. There are things that are right and there are things that are wrong. So we can see storytelling as an activity, and we need to connect the term activity with the term goal-oriented, or the category goal-oriented and the category purpose. And as we will see, we perform different activities because we have specific goals in mind. In the case of storytelling, stories can be instructional. They can, number one, get people to think about the fact that some things, again, are correct and other things are not correct. Some things are politically correct, politically incorrect, ethical, unethical. And these stories will enable the culture to regulate the kind of behaviors that the culture will promote and prescribe as correct, and the kind of actions that the culture will prescribe. So the culture will regulate behavior by means of narrative that will impose what is right and what is wrong. Therefore, the goal, the purpose of the narrative very often is to promote one type of behavior. That is, they have a pedagogical, instructional function. So they perform this action, or we perform this action, the action of storytelling, with a very clear aim in mind, to instruct people on the kind of things that we should do and we should not do. You can think of stories such as Little Red Riding Hood. In Little Red Riding Hood, we learn what is to be obedient, what is to be disobedient, what is to trespass, not to trespass. We need to know about acts of transgression, which is the right path, which is the wrong path. If we think of biblical narratives, we learn that we should do this and we should not do that. Again, there are prescriptions and prescriptions. We can eat from any fruit in the Garden of Eden, except for one tree, the tree of the forbidden fruit of knowledge of good and evil. So stories are instructional, they regulate behavior. That's why we see them as activities. We should not simply see stories as lists of events, sequences of events that are laid out on a sheet of paper or that are transmitted, conveyed by means of spoken language. That is the case. They acquire some type of materiality, but they are things that we do, hence activity, with a clear goal and a clear purpose in mind, to instruct, to tell people what is right and what is wrong. I hope that the repetition will serve the function that I have in mind right now, basically to get you to reflect upon the fact that narratives will impose some ways of behavior that are, we will say here, hegemonic. That is, they create what we call common sense. Hence, the social aspect of genre. So probably when we read stories and when we write stories, and here is the practical application of knowledge of genre, we might want to think about some ethical dilemma, some moral dilemma, some political dilemma. So we can think of, for example, cultural narratives such as the rags to riches narrative, which promote one type of behavior. That is, you can start from a very low station in society, in your culture, in your social class. You start here, you're at the bottom, and you can go up. How can you go up? Well, you can go up if you work hard, if you're industrious, if you focus, and some will say if you're individualistic. So, the rags to riches narrative is promoting one type of behavior. So by doing this, we're performing, it's an activity. That is why stories are performative. And that is the next term that we will discuss, the next category. It's very important to know what performativity is all about. When talking about performativity, it is both inevitable and desirable to talk about Austin. Austin is a philosopher of language who coined the term performative to make reference to some verbs that are used in the first person, singular, indicative mood, active voice to do things with language. So we might want to compare utterances such as I run and utterances such as I apologize or I promise. When I say I run, I am not running by saying or performing the act of speech, of stating the fact that I'm running. So, to say I run does not entail the performance of the action of running. However, if I say I promise that I will get you the book, by saying I promise, I am performing the act of promising. So these verbs that make reference to the act that we are performing while we utter them are called performative verbs. So performativity is a concept that pertains not only verbs but also the language in general. We can say that stories are performative. Why are stories performative? Stories are performative because they construct different semiotic realities, that is, different meaning-making realities. In passing, I would like to mention that according to Austin, all utterances are performative, given that there are implicit and explicit performatives. In our previous sentence, I run, there is an implicit performative, I assert that I run. There is something that we will discuss in our class on speech act theory. I didn't want to go on without mentioning this very important fact in respect to Austin's treatment of performative verbs. What is important for us here is that there are performative verbs. We have also said that there are performative narratives, and what we're going to say is that language is performative. Think of a language that only promotes the use of categories such as man and woman. That culture will promote one way of conceiving of sexual or gender reality, more specifically gender reality. It will construct, that's why we're talking about language as constructing semiotic, meaning-making worlds, meaning-making realities. Language, in that case, will be constructing a reality where only men and women are participants. We will be constructing a reality that is binary, gender binary. There are only two genders. There is man, there is woman. It's a culture that is heterocentric. So, a culture that promotes a reality, a semiotic reality. I'm talking about semiotic reality because it's a reality that is constructed by means of language. A language that constructs a reality where only men and women exist, where people relate sexually to one another in a binary fashion, what we're saying is that this is a heterocentric reality. And in so doing, we are excluding, we are shutting out other possibilities. Again, why are we saying all this? Because what we got here is a heterocentric narrative. That is, a narrative that will instruct us on the ways in which we should behave. Which are the prescribed possibilities, which are the possibilities that are left out, such as trans, for instance, or transgender, and which are the possibilities that are right, correct, the ones that are promoted, the ones that are prescribed, namely the binary man-woman heterocentric reality. So as you may have noticed, if we go back to our definition of genre, and more specifically in terms of narratives, we can see that narratives have stages, because when we tell these stories, there will be some kind of orientation or setting. If we think of the biblical narrative, the setting will be Eden, the Garden of Eden. There will be a conflict, basically an ethical dilemma, what we should do, what we should not do, what kind of actions are we promoting or not promoting. There will be an ending, there will be a resolution, and we will be evaluating, passing judgment, again prescribing different types of activities. So as we can see, there are parts to a story, and these stories perform actions, they do things, they are performative, and these actions have a specific purpose. So if we review again our definition of genre as a stage, goal-oriented, purposeful social activity, we can claim that narratives have stages, they have parts, and that these parts, if they work collaboratively, they make up a whole that is used to perform a social activity with a specific aim. In the case of narratives, the aim could be to instruct, to teach people what they should do, what they shouldn't do, in other words, to regulate verbal and non-verbal behavior. So we should stop seeing narratives as mere linguistic artifacts, and we should see the social aspect, again, the performative aspect of language. Last but not least, it is interesting to note that Bakhtinian will kick it to the picture here in the following way. One of the concepts, notion that we would like to highlight when talking about Bakhtinian is the notion of dialogicality. If we're talking about narratives that tell us what's right and what's wrong, there is a clear debate between two perspectives. Apart from the Bakhtinian dialogical perspective, in today's class we have mentioned a number of writers that contribute to paint a picture here, basically the generic picture. Let us review them: Eggins, Bakhtinian, Labov, and now we will mention Benveniste, because this is what we'll discuss in our next class. If we think of narratives as texts, okay, think of a story. The story is stated, is put in black and white on a sheet of paper. What we're going to say is that that is the text, or in English, utterance, in Spanish, enunciado. That is what we have said. As we will see, what we have said, the text proper, is the product, the effect, the outcome of an act of communication whereby, let us call him or her or they, speaker or speakers, are talking to some sort of otherness, and in so doing they perform an act of speech. As we will see, we will talk about an act of enunciation, by means of which we are doing something with language and we are producing this text that is the product or outcome or result of our enunciation. We will analyze texts, but again we will analyze texts in future classes in order to see and find the traces of the whole act of communication in the text. So the text will provide us with some entries, some, again, traces of the whole act of communication. Technically, we will be discussing enunciation theory. We will say that there is a source of enunciation, not called speaker, but we will call the source of enunciation a locutor. There will be a reception. We will call that interlocution or interlocutor. And there will be an act, the act of speaking or writing proper. And there will be an outcome. That is the text we produce. These are the elements, the four elements: interlocutor, locutor, act, and text, product of the act of enunciation. And we will discuss that in our class on enunciation theory. I am aware of the fact that probably there is a very feeble, weak connection between what I have just said, enunciation theory, and what I said before, genre theory. I would like to clarify that there is a reason why we're going to have a whole other class, a whole other video on enunciation theory, and we will, I promise, this is a performative act. I will establish connections between genre theory and enunciation theory. Our classes will have this logic. We will introduce problems, we will introduce dilemmas, questions. What is the connection between enunciation theory and genre? We haven't answered that yet. That is more of a question that we will discuss in the future, and we will, I hope, have answered some other questions. For example, there was a first class on genre theory, and today we have clarified a number of issues related to genre theory. We hope that you have a clearer picture of what we mean by stage, goal-oriented, purposeful, social activity, a clearer picture than you used to have. Now we have a whole other problem. What is the connection between enunciation theory or enunciation, the way we have described it, and genre? That is a question we will answer the following class. This is basically the dialectics of our course. We clarify some issues and we create some other obscurities in order to hopefully clarify them in the future, so that you can, by the end of the course, have acquired a number of tools to analyze discourse. If you have enjoyed this class, please like, subscribe, comment, so that we can have engagements and we can engage in interesting debates on both genre and its social function. Bye-bye.